Hey everyone, I'm John McLucas, and in this video, I'm going to cover 5 ways to make your bass or 808s more dynamic and punchy in your music. Let's go ahead and jump in with one of my original songs, Play It Out. So the first thing I want to show you is using some subtle automation with EQ to really let the sub be the star in the big moments and pull it back just slightly beforehand. So right here, I have a bass. And up until the chorus hits, the big moment in the song, I'm pulling out just a little bit of the lowest sub, and then I let it come forward. And this is a great way, using just an EQ to pull back a little bit of sub information in a smaller section to then let it be the star in the bigger one here. So it's super, super subtle, and you will need headphones for this episode. Otherwise, you're gonna have a hard time hearing these things. But when I play this downbeat on the full chorus, compared to here, it's very, very subtle, but again, it's just a little less full energy coming forward. So if you want to make this yourself, all you have to do is you can pull up any EQ. We're going to make a low shelf. Typically, I want to make sure this is only affecting the fundamental of the sub. So I want to make sure that I'm hitting that note. That's our highest note. I know because I know this song. So I know that's my highest note. So as long as we're here and affecting right around 100 hertz, which tends to be a sweet spot for this, of course, it ranges by key, then I'll be good to go. So then I'll go ahead and just leave it off and then turn on automation for the gain. So I can automate this parameter here. I will open up my automation in my DAW and navigate to the EQ. And then I'll simply highlight the section I want to reduce the sub intensity of here. And we should be good to go. So now you can see that as this plays through, we're gonna get in the bag, bag in the trash, no more hock up on my stash. Right, instead of just a little more of that sub energy that might be too much for the intro. In the bag in the trash, no more hock up on my stash. It's a little more overwhelming, but then when I just go ahead and put this in place, boom. In the bag in the trash, no more hock up on my stash. Just a little held back, and it just makes it so much sweeter when we get to that fullness in. Just to get my shot with you. I started trying to get so close now. Right, a great subtle way. It's gonna leap forward. Nobody's gonna hear that it really leaps forward. And I'm cutting just about 2 to 3, maybe 3.5 dB, depending on the section and how big of a dynamic jump you want this moment to be in the song. The second thing we can do to add some incredible subtle dynamics is playing with the ADSR function of our bass. This won't work as much with a real bass. This is more for 808s or synth basses because we don't have this exactive controls, but you could also dial this in with something like a compressor that's going to bring up the sustain that doesn't exist in a previous section as well. It's just a little different process, but the same philosophy, same approach. What we want to do is change the shaping of the actual bass sound. And that will be the vehicle that brings some extra dynamics. Now take a listen to this bass here. In the first part, notice how it fades away. And then this one is just very straight ahead, it stays in the same sustain and same dynamic level. So all you have to do is, again, I will likely make the bigger bass first. I'm a fan of making the bigger section, and then we pull things back into the smaller parts. So if we take a look at this bass, our bigger sound that's more sustained, I have a long decay time. It's not even going to finish decaying for 15 seconds pretty much. And even when it does, it's a very subtle decay. So over 15 seconds, it's going to decay the sound 6.5 dB, which we don't have anything for 6 seconds. But if you haven't played with the ADSR parameters before, the decay is how long it takes to go from the initial sound to the level of the sustain. So if we have a short decay, it's going to make that change from the transients volume to the sustain very quickly. And if we have a long decay, it's going to take a very long time. Now, if we have a short decay and we move our sustain down, now notice how as I'm moving these down, it's getting less full and less intensity with the low end, which is exactly what we want to do. So that's a very extreme example, and you could obviously use a bass like this if you wanted to for a prior section. I'm going to show you a more subtle use case of it. So again, the decay now means in over 3 seconds of sustain, it's going to decrease the sound by 16, 17 dB, and that's too extreme. We don't want that. I mean, I personally don't want that for the sound. So I still want it to go to its original setting, and what I'll do is then duplicate it out into a secondary bass here. So I would have duplicated this out into its own instrument, and now you can see, just check the difference here. Subtle difference in decay and sustain. That's our long one, and this is our less full bass. So now our first 2 notes compared to the full sustain, pretty substantial, and it makes a big difference in context too. Right, that fades away a good amount, right? It's just, but this, right, that's a lot more drastic than even the low end automation. That takes up a lot more space equity, I guess to say, in the track with that very full sustain. So a great way when you're using synth basses, a little extra dynamic in your verse, your pre-chorus, building up to something that's just so deliciously smooth when we have a great starting sound like this. A third thing you can do is to integrate passing tones in your bass lines. Now, if you're a bassist, this sounds like an obvious thing to do, but when people come in, and I know for myself and a lot of you, if you're coming in as a laptop-started producer, you're really used to working in the DAW, in the box, and throwing on roots and just kind of going with that. You may not be as accustomed to using passing tones. So let me go ahead and show you what happens in this next chunk of the song. Actually, before we do that, I'm going to show you, because this section sounds chaotic because it's a third chorus. It's combining these 2 melodies.
I see you trying to get so close now. I feel the way you're looking good now.
With the bridge melody. Right, so then it comes together. So it sounds chaotic, but it's because it's a third chorus and it's one of those like reprise celebration moments. So, all right, now let's take a look at the actual bass line here. We have right here and here. So passing tones are the way, my understanding of them, and I think there's specific Italian words for some of these variations, but anytime that we're deviating from this root note as a way to lead to another note, the next chord. So in its basic form, it would be these 4 notes, which is what we have over here, right? And then it's these little details that aren't in a chord shape. Those little guys, this little fill, those are our passing tones. So what you can do is start with the main 4 chords, and then I will look at these passing points between the chords, and add in the pitch either immediately above or below the following chord. So for example, right, we had A, then we have A to F. So what I can do is try adding in the pitch immediately above or below F in my key. So we're in C major. Yes, we change keys from G to C major. So I can go ahead and try the G or the E leading up to this F, and they'll probably both technically be correct, but one may stick out more than the other. I wasn't a huge fan of that. I think that one's a lot more agreeable to me. But see how no matter what it is, if we're leading into a chord, I'll usually use one beat like I did here. This is one beat. Or a half beat like I did here. A little more of a pickup. Instead of that being a full beat. So I look at it, I just toggle between those two options for rhythm. Both solid options. It's going to be really case dependent. But if I toggle between a one beat or a half beat, and then I always use the following chord as my guide and go one pitch up, one pitch down, it just makes easy options for a little more excitement in your bass line. And then naturally you can get a little more creative and add fills at the end of your phrase. Little stuff like that. But if you're just getting started with passing tones, you can sit with just a couple of little tweaks there on the synth. Makes it feel a lot more realistic and like you're playing a bass and maybe making more decisions that a bassist would make. But speaking of that, that leads me into number 4, which is to take it up a notch and to use the fifth or the octave as a means of creating intensity. Now, this could be used in the sense of how I'm using passing tones at the end of a phrase, or we could use this in harmony. I use this oftentimes. The easiest starting point is to use it in rhythm with the kick drum or something in the drums to create this opportunity. So let me show you. I'm going to deconstruct this, but I'll show it to you really quick, and then we'll this chord. And I know on the surface, you're like, well, John, yeah, that's an octave. Cool story, bro. But I want to explain how conceptually I put that together, because it does add excitement that's really harmonically agreeable, whereas the passing tones has some dissonance and tension. These changes are very consonant and fit in really well. So the first thing that I'll do is I will go ahead and look up to my drums and find the rhythm of the kick drum, because that tends to be what I like the bass gluing to the most. You can do to other things. I typically use the kick drum. And then I will use that as a guide to create rhythm and just set it all on the root note of this chord. Doom, doom, doom. Boom, perfect. So I'll get it set in place, and then I'll use either a fifth up, an octave up, a fourth down, which is the fifth, but the inversion. So octave up, fifth up, fourth down, octave down. And those 4 solutions can be really intriguing to add some energy. So I'll typically take some of the shorter notes here and then try those options out. So what I had done here is use the octave, because that's super consonant. Great solution. I'm probably not going to go down too much because these notes are already very low. So I'm going to forego that, but conceptually you can. So let's say I wanted to try something different. Maybe I wanted to go there, octave, fifth, root. I don't think it's really great in this moment, but harmonically it does work and make sense. It's just that this section is so busy that the fifth is not working for me. So I wouldn't do that, but just want to show you that there's so many ways to cut this and to play with it. So I'll typically affect the shorter notes and then leave the longer note as the sustained one here. So that way we still have the foundation here. And then I could even take it a step further and set up those 2 other kick hits, which I didn't do in this song. But if I want to do the whole bar, oh, that should be that. Or I could try a fifth. That works a lot better there. I still might even go octave. Right, just easy options for you and your bass. Now, the last thing is not going to be in the DAW, but I wanted to include it because we're having a discussion of subfrequencies and low end. When it comes to monitoring low end and low frequencies, I'm just going to walk through my process for doing it to make sure I'm immune to any anomalies that happen in one certain space, because the default is the car check, which is a great thing to do. I go to my car still very much, and I appreciate it, and it has a lot of value, but also a car, just like any other setup, does have its limitations. So it's not going to be the be all end all for you. And so the way that I've kind of worked around this to make sure my song is fitting in is first thing I'll do is select 5 songs, put them into a playlist that feel good for me. Then I'll take that playlist and I'll have at least 2 separate sub-heavy sources, car and Beats headphones. Car plus even the newer AirPods are really bass heavy. And what I'll do, I'll even push them into my ears because it gets extra subby when I do that, just lightly, of course. I have these headphones which have certain room emulations that can be great for that too. But either way, I'm just making sure that I have at least 2 sub sources. So I'll bring a song out. I will play into the chorus of a reference song, listen through. Then I will play my song, listen through. Then I will play another reference song. So that's 3 things: reference, my song, reference. What this does is I hear their low end, I hear my low end, and then I go back to other low end that I like. And it is way easier to hear it now when I have to hear mine and then go back instead of just hear reference, hear mine. Because maybe my judgment's getting skewed, but then I have to go back to a third source. So again, it is to get 5 songs, then take your 5 reference songs, put them in a playlist, take your track into that system you want to listen on. You're going to first listen to one reference, then listen to your track, then listen to a second reference. So it really contextualizes your song, your low end, and how it is performing on that reference system, maybe your car, compared to the others. Then to go replicate that same process with your secondary low end checking space. So that is everything I have for you today. I appreciate your time and energy with me. Hope this was incredibly helpful for stuff you want to implement in your own music, and I will see you in the next episode. Cheers.